Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Middle East Institute for this event on developments in Tunisia. My name is Intisar Fakir, and I am a senior fellow here at MEI and the director of the North Africa and Sahel program. 3 weeks into the recent developments, our panel here is going to help us understand how domestic actors are staking their various positions, the range of the next steps considered, including the future of elected institutions, the future of government, and the future of the constitution. We will also discuss what role do and can outside actors play. So for our discussion today, joining us from Tunis is Hinda Fallah. Hinda is a Tunisian civil society activist. Since 2012, she has been an advocate for freedom of expression, transparency, and domestic transition. Also joining us from Tunisia is Dr. Aya Jrad. Aya is a researcher and assistant professor of security studies with over 10 years of experience in border security, countering violent extremism, international governance, institutional governance and reform, social and state resilience, and the rule of law. She holds a PhD in international relations law from the Faculty of Legal, Political, and Social Sciences of the University of Carthage. Also joining us from Tunis is Fadel Ali Reda. He is a non-resident fellow at MEI's North Africa and Sahel program. He's also the founder and editor of Meshkel, an excellent resource with the latest reporting and analysis on Tunisian affairs. And finally, from DC is Dr. William Lawrence. Bill is also a non-resident fellow in our program with a long expertise on North Africa. Bill has held numerous posts focused on the region in the US government, in civil society, think tanks, and in academia as well. I also wanted to highlight that both Aya and Fadel have recent pieces on Tunisian developments, so please be sure to check them out. Fadl's piece is on our website, and Aya's piece is in the Arab Reform Initiative website. Maybe my colleagues can put up a link to to Fadl's piece and Aya's piece as well. I also wanted to mention that our colleagues at the Zogby Research Service are launching a nationwide poll to assess the Tunisian public's view of the issues that we are discussing today. And the results will be released by MEI in the coming month or so stay tuned for those. So Hinda, we will start with you. Can you talk us through what Kais Saied has been doing since July 25th, especially his anti-corruption efforts, concrete action versus rhetoric, and why is this such a key endeavor for him?
Hi, Intisar. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. To start, actually, the situation is still not clear. Still, we have a lot of uncertainty, no clear vision, no clear plan for the future. Since July 25th, we've been every day discovering, waiting for a new order, a new decision, everything it's a total suspense for all of us every day. And so I want to start also by the position of the national actors in Tunisia, mainly the national organization, political parties. There is a clear division regarding what's happening. No clear, some of them, most of the national organization, they didn't have a clear position regarding is it a coup or not coup. They didn't announce that, but the common thing that we noticed around throughout the statements, there is a big demand for to end this period, the exceptional measures within the announced period. Kais Saied announced 30 days for these special measures, and so we waiting to see all the measures taken during this period, and what also was been demanding is that to reassure us about the protection of the human rights, the freedom of the press, mainly all what we have in the Constitution as rights and freedoms. We got that reassurance, but also we're not sure that these measures will not be violating these freedoms in the name of exceptional measures, and we saw some cases of that. And so regarding the anti-corruption rhetoric, we saw clear actions. There are a lot of arrests. The public prosecution is moving. Until today, like we saw, there are moving around, let's say, old cases. It's not new. These are cases that we've been asking for the last years, but the problem is how they're prioritizing these arrests and these actions. It's like, for example, starting with arresting an MP, Yasin Ayari, by the military court is a big mistake. It's not only a mistake, but also it's something that we cannot allow, not before, not now, because we've been always against prosecuting civilians by the military court. And also we saw many like MPs after the lifting of the immunity, they were prosecuted for defamation, but also there is no real actions towards the tax evasion cases, the sexual harassment, the embezzlement, the abuse of power. We have a list of these cases, and I allow myself to mention that iWatch organization did this whole list. They I also prepared a whole excellent roadmap as a suggestion for the president if he have the real willingness to go after to fight corruption. But honestly, this is also still not clear at all, because it's just random arrests, random cases. There is no clear steps for what's next, as there will be any amendment for the laws, there will be any, and specifically, if we want to trust the president, we want to see also a clear focus on the foreign funding for political parties. If this is a problem also for Tunisians, like for why these decisions were taken, actually, if we ask ourselves, like in the 25th of July, what led to this situation is because of the political scene and what Tunisians are not satisfied about this political elite and how they acted during the last 10 years. And part of it is how they won the elections, how they come to be in the parliament, to be in government, etc. And basically, we're talking about foreign funding. So for me, actually, it's a priority now. And today we saw the general prosecution starting this case about the lobbying thing that was exposed last week for Nahda party. And it's not only the Nahda, it's all the political parties. We always raised the issue of the electoral campaign funding. The Court of Accounts also, they did amazing reports, but because of impunity, because the absence of the political willingness to fight corruption and to hold people accountable, there was nothing done. And so now it's the momentum, let's say. If Saied is really serious about fighting corruption, it is now the moment to open this file and go in depth with with big investigation with the funding. And so I think we stay, and I'm not saying stay hopeful, but I always say it, like, I want the president to prove us wrong, that we can, at least in the period that is left from the 30 days that he announced, at least we saw actual move and decisions taken regarding fighting corruption. It is not only also decision to be taken as a revenge or as a also to justify his grab of all powers. That we don't want to see. Also, we want to see also a clear announcement that the judiciary should stay independent. We're still not seeing that. We still also, even like it is unfortunately even the judiciary that should take responsibility of this needs a big reform. It's also suffering from a big problem with judges who also seemed to work to not who seem to were absorbed by political parties, and they have also, it was, these issues were exposed lately, and we want that serious measures to be taken in this regard. If judges need to be prosecuted, they need to be prosecuted on time, not also to leave it to I don't know, next government or next. It's now or never. So we're waiting for Aya also will be speaking about the future. But mainly these are our demands. I think it's also necessary to stress that no matter what happened, we always need to remind ourselves that also Tunisians' demands are legitimate. If Tunisians went out in the streets and asked for a change must be done. No matter what, okay, we will still have to have these discussions around, is it a coup or not coup or whatever, but I guess it should be always, and that's why I don't agree on the narrative that I saw from the people who are against Saied, actually. This narrative is actually neglecting the interests of the people, of the Tunisian people. They are not seeing that they're seeing only its political, like, okay, we're talking about democracy, about threats, etc. We're all defending transitional period and the democratic transition. We all defended it, but also we still have to keep in mind that Tunisian interests are above all. And now, for example, last week when we saw vaccines coming to Tunisia, more Tunisians benefiting from this campaign, etc. It is we should stay hopeful and should encourage more these actions, no matter what is the, how the politics get through all of this. And even the president, like the propaganda saying this through his speeches, that without his efforts we couldn't do this. But no matter what, he can use that for himself. But I'm sure that this is for the benefit of Tunisians, and that's what we should keep in mind. And that's why people who are pro-coup, not coup, whatever, I always say it is necessary to remind ourselves what is the right thing to do. And that's what we're waiting for from Saied for the moment, as he's the one who orchestrating all of this, is to do the right thing. And also it is crucial that we stay vigilant to expose any violation. It's good, actually, because we saw all Tunisian NGOs and activists, they're still talking, they're still exposing violations. When, for example, the journalist from the New York Times, she was just have a papers checkpoint, you know, like everyone was talking about it. Everyone highlighted, okay, this is maybe a violation for the freedom of the press, etc. So, and also for Al Jazeera. And this is the good thing, that we still continuing to expose and to stay vigilant, and that's the interesting thing for the moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hinda. I want to move on to Aya. Aya, we still don't have a prime minister. There's still no government, no parliament. So what's the future of these institutions, and where does this leave Tunisia?
Thank you, Intisar, and thank you, Hinda, for the presentation you've done. I want to just start by saying that I don't know, and I don't think that anyone knows what's actually going to happen in the next few days. So what I'm going to try to do here is maybe present some hypotheses and to try to see how plausible they are and how possible they are for the current context. Yes, Intisar, just like you said, we still have no head of government and no government. And this is the first in Tunisia's history, like Qasba is being run by an administrative employee, by a director general, which is a very strange situation for the moment. There are prerogatives that need to be done with a minister, with a prime minister, with a head of government that currently cannot be signed off because they don't have the needed competence and the needed prerogative. So this situation is a very much blocking the current event. And this is the first thing people, and whether experts or non-experts in the matter, have been calling. We need a head of government. Tunisia is going through an economic crisis. Tunisia is going through negotiation. These negotiations are generally being carried by Al-Qasba, by the head of government headquarters, and not the presidency. The presidency does not have the technical capacity or the competencies or the resources to carry those negotiations. So it's the most pressing thing now to have a head of government appointed. So what if within the next few days government is appointed, the head of government is appointed? The question is then, do they have to go to the parliament to get them their confidence, or don't they? Actually, there are two possibilities. There are the hypothesis that within exceptional circumstances, they're not supposed to go to the parliament to gain the confidence, especially that they have been appointed as implementation of Article 80. The other hypothesis is that they have to do, and they will go to the parliament to get to gain the confidence. But what if the parliament fails to do so? What if the parliament either votes no or fails to vote and abstain from voting? In this situation, according to the constitution, the president of the republic has the possibility and the right to dissolve the parliament and to call for early elections. In this situation, then the president himself will carry on issuing decree laws until the new parliament is elected. This is, if we are looking to reintegrate the current constitution, this is the most fit prerogative possibilities, that they go to the parliament fails to grant them confidence, even from abstaining, and then we dissolve the parliament and go to early elections. But this rationale presumes that we go into election with the current electoral law, which is in itself very problematic. So would that be the next options? I don't think so. And it also presumes that Kais Saied will have independent list that would defend his project in the next parliament, which is also a bit far-fetched. Back to the dissolution of the parliament, because I've heard people talking about the dissolution of parliament, especially that there were calls from MPs themselves saying that they would resignate. I've heard MPs from Shab movement who said that we now have around 100 MPs ready to resign and we cannot go back to that parliament. The idea is that even when, if they do resign, they would not dissolve the parliament. Whomever resigns, the next list comes in, so it doesn't really solve the problem. And even if a whole list is dropped, either as a sanction from what Hinda just talked a bit about, the foreign funding or other infraction and offenses linked to the electoral law, but there will be a partial election in whatever territory the list will be dropped. So this is not even the possible hypothesis for the next time. Some people are talking about removing the president. So when the parliament resumes its work after the 30 days or more, I'm going to touch upon that in a bit, they will be removing the president. That's not even possible in the current constitution, because they'll have to, because the parliament does not remove the president, they'll have to file the petition to the constitutional court, which doesn't exist, and then it's the constitutional court that decides. So that's not the possibility right now for what's going to happen. Would there be extensions of the 30 days deadline that Kais Saied has put in the first place? He actually said that he will, though in the presidential decree number 80, the presidential decree stipulated that could be the deadlines of the 30 days could be extended more, and the constitutional itself does not give how many times the extension could be carried and for how long. So the problem is that the constitution and the law in the country do not really provide answers for the current situation. So what other possibilities can we think of? Actually, there is one possibility that I think fits both the reasoning of Kais Saied and the functioning of the legal and institutional and constitutional framework in Tunisia. If Kais Saied goes ahead and decrees a temporary organization of power, which he actually said during the evening of the 25th, when he talked to the masses in Hudud Bourguiba, he says, we are under a provisionary organization of power. Did he really mean it formally, or did he mean it just theoretically, and we are thinking about it? But if he is thinking of issuing or decreeing an organization, a temporary or provisional organization of power, then that could be the solution to this situation. Tunisia has known since 2011 two provisional organization of power that we both called the small constitution, that gave laid out the relation between different powers, especially the now in blockage, the parliamentary or the legislative power and the executive power. Would there be this? We're waiting for whether he's going to be issue such a decree within the past few days, because it will give him, and whether there will be a national dialogue involving political parties, civil organization, whatever framework will be, this organization of power will be discussed in. It will give the possibility to go into a referendum to revise the current political system and to revise the current electoral law. Because the problem Tunisia is facing right now is due to this. And if we go revise the political system, it's not going to be the first time in history that a country revises its political system. So many countries did it, so it's not that problematic. And I think, and so many people think, that the current crisis is due to the fact that our political system is it's mind. It doesn't give you an answer. It gives you something, and then it gives you its total contrary. And if we go back to Kais Saied himself, his positions, he didn't vote through the 2011 Constituent Assembly elections because he said that it imposed a party system that circumvented the revolutionary path, etc. He didn't vote through the 2014 both legislative and presidential election for the same rationale. So if we go with that same rationale, the existing political system is to be reformed, and this is something that's very clear, because the political system, as I said, the reason why the whole crisis is happening for the past years, it's not just the past month, but also because we call it the parliamentary system, but Tunisia's system is not parliamentary. It's a system of assembly, where the assembly has all the powers. In a parliamentary system, we have power and counterpower. We have the parliament to whom the government is accountable, but also the government can hold the parliament accountable, which is not the case for Tunisia. In Tunisia, the assembly has almost all the power, and it has led to this partitocracy. Well, they decide where there is so much political instability, governmental instability. I don't think we have a government that lasted for more than 1 year for the last period. So the political, if we are to think about solving the system, this political system is a problem. The electoral law is also another problem that needs looking at, and I think Hinda could also talk about it, and if she might too. The system is so because it's based on the largest remainder method. It's really not giving rise to such a political elite. It gives rise to political parties that are lazy to do an effort, and because they are lazy, they would get seats anyway. So this is, if we think that this is what Kais Saied says on the 25th, this is what Kais Saied believes, that the system needs to be revised. I think this is personally, this is what I think. I think this is where Tunisia is headed, probably. And again, we don't know, either through an provisional organization of power, through a national dialogue. The methodology that doesn't count. The idea is that the rationale behind this situation is they can't be going back to the same parliament. People need accountability, and Hinda highlighted that so well in her presentation. People need to hold those people accountable for what they did. So coming back to the same assembly with the same composition, it's not going to be welcomed by the street. I think these are all the ideas I had in mind, and I would like to discuss them more to the extent of my knowledge. I mean, we cannot really know what's happening best, let's say, to whatever elements we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Aya. And on that note, I just want to send a quick reminder here that if you have any questions to our audience, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions, and then we'll get to them once we hear from the next two speakers. So next, I'd like to come to you, Fadl. Can you talk to us a little bit about Kais Saied's support base? You know, what's the extent of his domestic political capital, given the range of action, of potential action that Aya has laid out for us? And then I also would like you to touch a little bit on the role of external actors, and to what extent does that impact what's going on domestically?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for hosting this. So I wanted to sort of talk about the political capital of Kais Saied, because I think when we're trying to figure out his support, there's so much about him and his methods, both in the electoral campaign and recently, that is unorthodox. And particularly now in the absence of formal institutions, really, like the parliament, it's sort of hard to gauge his support or to gauge his constituency. In a sense, we may be seeing that the support for Saied or his particular policies, in many ways is a sort of social movement that doesn't necessarily have the kind of organizational structure or capacity that social scientists are maybe used to studying. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to try and figure out not only how Kais Saied won, we still haven't really heard that story fully told of how he won his election campaign, despite not having any traditional media, despite not having a political party behind him, despite not having so many of the sort of things you would expect for a politician. And of course, he said he's not really a politician in many ways. He's coming at this as an outsider. He's positioned himself as an outsider. He's showed himself that in many ways he is sort of an outside to the system. So without these sort of formal institutions, how can we sort of judge his support? I mean, I think it's important to sort of divide between people who are supporters of Kais Saied himself, people who are really dedicated to him and his political vision, whether that political vision is something that's maybe very formulaic and easy to sort of explain in or cohesive even, or you could also sort of say people who are supporting him because of the decisions he's taken, particularly against the last government and the last parliament. The last government and the last parliament were particularly hated by a lot of people. I think there was a low level of trust. Not just a failure in many ways with the health crisis, the COVID crisis, economic issues, but even not even trying in many cases to get on top of it, or not really putting the priority for these issues that people would expect a government to be putting at the time. Of course, it's widely seen as being a corrupt institution, parliament. There is impunity of officials and security forces. Of course, they have parliamentary immunity, so the lifting of parliamentary immunity, I think a lot of people see that as, this is the chance for members of parliament to not be above the law, that they should be judged by the letter of the law as everyone else is. Even if the law is particularly repressive, and certainly human rights groups, civil rights groups have been pointing for years to very repressive aspects of the law. And in so doing, they've called for reforms that haven't really been listened to. But now those laws, which had maybe previously been more enforced against maybe poor neighborhoods, maybe marginalized regions of the country, maybe bloggers who were critical of certain MPs, those same laws are also being turned against what is maybe the new political elite that we've seen since 2011. So it's almost like a bit of a leveling that's going on, saying these laws will be applicable to everyone equally. So I think there's those two elements, the people who are supporting Saied and people who are supporting his decisions against very unpopular institutions. I think if Henda did point out sort of this idea of, if he's going to have an anti-corruption campaign, and this is something that Saied has really promoted or built his sort of electoral and political legacy on, this sort of anti-corruption rhetoric. If it's going to be that the priority of cases is for not necessarily financial crimes, or the case of Member of Parliament Zahir Makhlouf for sexual assault against a young woman on the street, we're not seeing those cases prioritized now that the MPs have lost their immunity. We are seeing a priority of cases of speech. That is, I think, a great reason to sort of look at the failure of reform for the penal code, which dates back decades, many decades, even to the French colonization era. And also a telecommunications code from the Ben Ali era, which is being used oftentimes to prosecute cases of speech. But I do think it's interesting that, even it's not necessarily just human rights groups who are maybe raising the alarm bells about, for example, the case of Yassine Ayari, the member of parliament who's facing, military charges in military court. Actually, Mishkel had a report from a journalist who went to Sidi Hassin, one of the sort of working class neighborhoods of the capital. And even there, people who are generally supportive of Kais Saied's steps looked at the case of Yassine Ayari and said, this is something that, we don't necessarily agree with. This may be a misstep to have this be something that's really, the first one of the first cases that we see against MPs. So I think important to keep that in mind in terms of popularity as well. It's not just going after MPs will make him more popular and extend his popularity. I think, if it's seen as one-sided, many ways, like the way that Yusuf Shehed, one of the previous prime ministers' war on corruption was seen as one-sided, then that could also, I think, maybe diminish his political capital, or see him as not necessarily being following through on his promises with the anti-corruption campaign. And just to get a sense, I think there are new social movements, new groupings, new civic groupings, even new political parties that in this moment are coming together. Some of them are claiming to be supportive of Kais Saied, maybe not necessarily organizationally cohesive, or how they will sort of, whether they'll have lasting power, whether they can build, into the future. I do see that this is a sort of a real turning point in the way that I think we're seeing different groups of Tunisians organizing themselves politically, but we still have to sort of see where that ends up going. I do think there was, in a recent press conference of a group that claims to support Saied, we saw a lot of unemployed university graduates, people for whom the social promise was really broken. You'd get a good education, you'd get a good job in the public sector as a civil servant and a middle-class life. Over the last several decades, with the hollowing out of the public sector, we've seen that this dream is sort of evaporated, or it's become a false promise. And I think, it's interesting to see those groups of people who are very supportive of Kais Saied. Just to quickly touch on your second question on the question of foreign actors. Foreign policy has been, I think, quite important for Kais Saied. Of course, the presidency before this, his prerogatives, according to the constitution, if it's strictly read, were really sort of limited to national security and foreign policy. And as such, he cultivated a particular set of relations with the military and with foreign actors. clearly those are having an effect, or at least shaping July 25th and onwards. We may have seen, particularly in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, a belief among those countries that Saied's move on July 25th is part of a broader initiative against the wider, what they would see as the Muslim Brotherhood movement. And we've certainly seen within Tunisia sort of an eradicationist bloc who have been very vocal, quite a lot of demonization of the Ennahda party as being non-Tunisian or foreign and in need of being cut out of the political system. But I do think it's important that we saw on the night of the 25th that when demonstrators, maybe even perhaps people who were intent on vandalism going to the Ennahda party headquarters in Tunis, they were stopped by security officials. So I think for the moment, not just Saied, but elements of the state, the Tunisian state, do not necessarily see that Ennahda should be a scapegoat, even if certain elements of the society, perhaps with the support or at least the cheering on of the sort of the counter revolutionary regimes in the region are cheering it on. I don't think it's necessarily going to play out that way. And I think there's quite a lot of Tunisians who are worried about Tunisia sort of becoming maybe one of these fields of struggle between these regional players and trying to very much avoid a scenario where that actually continues to play out. And just to say the real economic actors on the economic side are maybe the most important is on the economic side, and those are not necessarily Gulf players, not Egypt, not necessarily even North African neighbors like Algeria and Libya, but really the European Union, the US, France. So I think in case of all of those with their macro financial assistance, their grants, their loans, the bond guarantees from the US, particularly as Tunisia is continuing its negotiations with the IMF, although we don't have news on that and where it will be going. I think a lot of people will be looking at that to see whether that will continue and whether Tunisia's economic direction will continue in the direction it's been going the last several years.
Great, thank you very much, Fadil. That sets us really nicely for Bill's remarks. Bill, I was hoping you can talk to us a little bit about the US perspective on this, Congress, White House, the future of aid specifically. What can Tunisia expect given what's been happening?
So I'll say more in my remarks, but I'll start by answering your question and saying that the White House, the State Department, and Congress are very, very worried about what's going on, much more worried than our three panelists. And I'll get into that a little bit. But it's a movie a lot of people feel they've seen before, just as a lot of Tunisians believe that they've seen this type of criticism of creative political moves before, that's a problem. But something you often hear from young Tunisians that I talk to is that things can't get worse. And what Washington is seeing is that things could get much, much, much worse than what's going on right now. And this is the main concern. I think all of the worries aptly flagged by my co-panelists today are the real worries. So it's just further extrapolations of the worries that they expressed that are causing Americans to rethink the entirety of the US-Tunisian relationship. But let me back up for a minute. So 10 years ago, a protest movement in Tunisia fundamentally transformed Tunisia and the whole region. It's the most important thing that happened in the region in my lifetime, more than the Iranian Revolution, more than the US invasion of Iraq, more than all the Israel-Palestine conflicts. And its effects will be felt for decades. And the impact of what Tunisia does now is critical for that assessment of what can happen in terms of democratic movements in the region. As we saw in many protest waves after 2011, most notably in 2019, where we had big ones in Algeria, Sudan, Lebanon and Iraq, toppling two regimes, Algeria and Sudan to a degree. What the international community and local populations seem to believe is that you can fix socioeconomic problems through political changes, and this could not be further from the truth. The reason for the Tunisian explosions were more socioeconomic than political. And the assistance should be more socioeconomic than political. And in fact, we've gotten quite obvious. We've gotten 10 years of concentration on politics in Tunisia, and the international community has been focused much more on political assistance. And people have suffered because Tunisians never fully got the revolutionary dividends they thought they would get. And now they want to hit a reset. I think, and I've said this, the US should pull a kind of jujitsu move regarding economic assistance, because what everyone's saying who defends democracy is the US should try to block Saudi Arabia and Emiratis from bankrolling the power grab. Not only will the US not do this, and it's not good international affairs practice, but Tunisia needs the money. So all of the Gulf money that Tunisians are willing to accept should come in. What the US should be cautioning its Gulf partners to do is to not upset democratic practice in Tunisia through the funding. And the US should, I believe, increase its socioeconomic funding to Tunisia, which it should have long done. One thing that gets overlooked a lot is that Tunisia's national budget's only 15 billion. You can feed all of Tunisia with the same amount of money it would take to feed all of Giza in Egypt. And Gulf countries will quickly discover, if they haven't already, that you can underwrite Tunisia's anti-democratic moves on the cheap, which is of concern here. So the solution, I don't believe, should be trying to block Gulf money from coming in. The solution should be to give Tunisia a lot of assistance and then start a conversation about democracy through that. Now, let's talk about what some of my friends call the full Kais Saied, the triptych, of what he'd like to implement. And I'd like to take it in reverse order. First, he wants presidential and legislative elections. Actually, that's third. He wants presidential legislation, and it seems like the 80% of parliament that's opposing his moves agree there should be presidential and legislative elections. I don't think the US needs to be opposed to that in any way. I think elections and a reset are exactly what Tunisia needs. Second on his triptych is up to bottom, bottom to top electoral reform, sort of a Tunisian professorial version of Gaddafi's Jamahiriya, where you sort of have to win local district elections. You're not the member of a party. It's Omda democracy, and then on up to elections to some sort of brother leader at the top. This, if Tunisians want that form of government, that's their right. But what the US should be focused on is how Tunisians get there. The reason why Tunisian democracy was more successful than the Egypt attempt is that the Tunisians took a 90% solution as opposed to a 51% solution, Morsi's approach. And right now, Saied seems to be potentially implementing a tyranny of the majority, a 51% solution, hence all the worries. A 90% solution means that some sort of national constituent assembly, like in 2011, 12, 13, some kind of national dialogue that produces agreed upon reforms that 80, 90% Tunisians can get behind is the only way to go in electoral reform. And reforms by plebiscite, reforms by decree don't get you there. Now, then the first thing, which is the presidential system. The US should not be opposed to this. It works better. So I think the US could very much get behind a presidential system in Tunisia where the parliamentary problems and impasses that the Tunisians have run into get fixed by a better, stronger presidency. Now, if Saied was sincere, he would grab none of those powers. He would say, we're going to invent a system for the president after me. I think if he's insincere, he'll try to have a reform by decree that gives him the power to make the changes now. Then you're talking about, this kind of autocratic approach to reform. I also believe that security sector reform and judicial sector reform, which was the highlight of our crisis group coverage in 2012 and 11, is extremely important for the reasons that were put forward by the panelists. And you don't get it by decree, you get it by systemic reform. And one thing that Saied has proven so far is that he's very good at sort of sloganeering and firing people and sort of putting people on house arrest, right? But he's not really building up alliances for systemic reform. Now, there's some who call this a constitutional coup or a constitutional dictatorship. I don't like these terms because what's going on isn't really constitutional, despite the sort of papering over of his misreading of the Constitution. I do believe this is a self-coup. This is an autogolpe. We've had 146 or 150 or so attempts since 1946, none of which ended in democracy, not because of the insincerity of the putschists, but because it's an undemocratic way to go about it. It's not a way that bears the fruit that everyone in Tunisia wants. One Tunisia analyst called Saied a strong man in a weak position. I think it's quite the opposite. I think he's a weak man in a strong position, who has shown time and again his inability to make alliances and to work with the Tunisian power brokers. And yet the Tunisian revolution, the Tunisian civil society has given him incredible power right now that he can either wield intelligently or not. But so far, so bad. He tried to fire all the mayors and was told he couldn't. He tried to fire all the governors and managed to fire one. He's put the parliament virtually and all of Tunisian society on house arrest. More than 3 Tunisians, according to his decree, can't even go in the street right now. He's fired lots of officials, including the whole IMF negotiating team. He's beginning the arrests and the purges. He's put tanks around the parliament, his palace, and the media areas, and closed down one TV station and arrested journalists, which has been gotten into, none of which needs to go very far, has to turn for the worse, but all of which looks to longtime watchers of politics as highly problematic. One former advisor to Saied said to a friend of mine, Mandush Basharin, he has no advisors, as a plus. But that's kind of a problem because he doesn't seem to be getting good advice, except when people say, you can't do this, which has been the case on many of the things that he's tried. So I am not optimistic about the short-term moves. I am optimistic about Tunisians' willingness of the street and civil society to hold him accountable. I heard that in many other similar situations, such as Egypt 2013, which is radically different, but everyone said Egyptians won't go back, they won't give up their revolutionary gains, and that's exactly what happened. I don't believe that Tunisia should go back to 2011 and start all over. I think 2013 is the right comparison, a crisis quite similar to this. That's not the way Saied sees it. I think UGTT and the military and others will eventually start seeing that way if they aren't already. I also believe that the argument that things can't get worse are definitely not true. If you look at just 2 coups in Algeria and 2 coups in Libya, or self-coups, 1969, 1992, 2015, and 2019, these moves don't normally lead to democratic outcomes. There's there's just one last point. There's also this idea that there's no alternatives. There are tons of alternatives here to what's going on, and the outside players should push Saied in that direction. So,
Bill, I'm going to interrupt you, but we will come back and talk about the potential directions, hopefully, as we address some of these questions. So let me just kind of bundle up a few of these questions, and then we'll come back to some of the panelists, and then we can have you come back and talk about alternatives that exist. So in terms of the questions, I'm going to try to kind of put them in a couple of different categories. So we've got a question here about the economy. Fadl, I'm going to come to you with that question. What's the future of the negotiation with the IMF, given what Bill has explained about Kais Saied's action in regarding, firing some of the people who are involved in the negotiation. And then the other question that I'm going to put forward, Hind, I'll have you come in on the question of transitional justice and whether that remains a priority or not. And then the last sort of a pot of questions that I will put forward here, Aya, to you on the question of, the use of the military in terms of, military support and the use of the military in terms of sort of, pushing forward some of the actions that Kais Saied is doing. So let me start with you, Fadl, Hinda, then on to you, and then Aya.
Thanks, Intisar. On the IMF question, I mean, the news, Bill's point that the entire IMF team has been fired is new to me. I know that Kais Saied had appointed a new de facto interim Minister of Finance. And in that video, he complained about not being able to reach the previous finance minister to fire him, that he had gone to Italy and stayed in Italy. So, there is certainly an attempt by Saied to put in new people, but I don't know how far that goes into the Ministry of Finance. But it's also, I'd be surprised if he takes a fundamentally different position on the IMF and getting a loan from the IMF at this moment. We haven't seen strong rhetoric on his part on this. At the same time, given the fact that this rather drastic political change comes after we saw 2 months of prices being raised on consumer goods, so whether that's sugar, the subsidies being lifted on sugar, whether that was the price of drinking water, of iron, of several other sort of products that we've seen price increases on. Some of them were raised by the government directly. Others were just not sort of given control, or there was sort of no intervention from the government on price policy. The fact that we saw in many ways those last 2 months leading to celebrations when the government fell down, I think there's going to probably be a reassessment, or there should be a reassessment of some of the IMF policies when it comes to conditionality and austerity, when it comes to social spending, when it comes to hiring in the public sector. That really, if you don't want to put at risk political stability in the country, that these sort of conditions might need to be rethought of. But at the same time, there's obviously still the recognizing that Tunisia does have public debt that needs to pay. That the debt to GDP ratio is 90%, and there's quite a lot of loans that are due this year. And if I can just add one note on, I saw that there was also a question about jobs and natural resources. Tunisia, one of Tunisia's natural resources is actually agriculture. I mean, North Africa used to feed the Roman Empire. This is sort of the old thing that happens, but now Tunisia actually imports most of its food. If there was a sort of a fundamental shift in agricultural policy towards different sort of farming priorities, to feeding the domestic population, that's a source of jobs right there that really hasn't been considered, but I think is going to have to be part of the discussion when we're talking about real structural changes to the Tunisian economy going onwards, and something that can create jobs as well.
Okay, well, just while we're on the question of the economy, I want to also ask Bill here if he can maybe weigh in on the future of the MCC compact. Do you, Bill, have any insights or updates on that? And then the other thing that sort of struck me in hearing you talk about potential Gulf aid is that, is there how much of that is coming? Has there been any indication that there is going to be significant aid coming from the Gulf? Or is this just something that we sort of talk about as we see their support for his action?
Well, it wasn't lost on anyone that Said's first 2 meetings were with the Egyptian foreign minister and the Saudi. And while I do agree with what Fadl was implying, that this doesn't necessarily mean anything. I also believe that, as we've seen in Libya and elsewhere, they're not really waiting for Said to tell them, how to posture themselves vis-a-vis Tunisia. And I also believe that offers have been made. There have been several indications that offers have been made. And as I said, it's so cheap compared to what they did for Egypt. And the context so much better that that's just low-hanging fruit for the Gulfies. And I do believe that Washington should not get in the way of that, because Tunisians need the money. I think it all needs to be about conditioning the conversation on 90% solutions, not tyrannies of the majority. I think on MCC, and this gets to a larger point I skipped over, the US on Libya and many other situations often believes that the US and the UN can sanction countries into behaving democratically. And I think that's exactly the wrong approach to Tunisia at this point, because I don't think, just like Saied can't arrest his way into anti-corruption, you can't sanction Tunisia into fixing systemic problems of corruption, which we've all been flagging since the beginning. So it needs to be a better mix of carrots and sticks, and MCC is the perfect carrot. So I was a longtime advocate for the changing of the threshold for Tunisia, because Tunisia was too rich before the J curve of the post-revolutionary economic recessions actually dropped Tunisia down into the category where it could get MCC funds. But the US needs to be much better at positive conditionality and carrots. And so not only should the US be rushing vaccines and oxygen and everything else like what they're starting to do and the French are doing too regarding the pandemic, but I think there should be emergency economic assistance going in immediately outside of the MCC context to signal to the Tunisian people, who I think are more in the driver's seat here than they even realize in some cases. They need to be shown that the US is a friend of Tunisia and wants positive economic outcomes, while never congratulating the anti-democratic moves Saied has gotten into. And let me just add on the IMF. I don't agree with Fadel. I think that IMF, despite many years of reports and mea culpas by the IMF and the World Bank, including the famous report on Tunisia that came out a few years ago about how the IMF got Tunisia all wrong, they're at it again, right? They're trying to use austerity to get Tunisia's balance sheet and inflation under control, when that's exactly the wrong approach. And I think Saied will probably try to completely revamp the strategy and say to the IMF, why don't you read your own documentation? What you're doing is bad for Tunisia. Austerity is not the way out here. And I actually agree with that point of view. The problem is that Saied doesn't seem to understand basic economics. So when he went to Utica and said, lower your prices, that's not something Utica will do or can do. And it's really bad for Tunisia's investment position and the view of international. I mean, right now, most Tunisian business leaders, even though they haven't been told, believe they can't leave the country, right? That's not good for business. Until Tunisia starts to get its micro and macroeconomic house in order, something I don't think Saied is up to, the negotiations with the IMF aren't going to go well.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, Hinda, do you want to come in on the question of transitional justice?
Yes, thank you, Intisar. Thank you to, sorry, I forgot the name, who asked about the transitional justice. Actually, I just want to make a reminder that it was a hell of work on transitional justice, and it's mainly done by the Dignity and the Truth and Dignity Authority. But the problem with this started within this authority when internal fights, mainly by the president, Sihem Ben Sidrine, and the board, starts internal problems. And so after that, it escalated into a huge problem regarding, and especially when they started working on the compensation for the victims. Here we're talking about a lot of money. It should be carried out by the Dignity Fund, صندوق الكرامة, and that's when the narrative around these monies from the taxpayers and the people who are against Nahda saying no, we are against this big amount of money going to the victims, which are most of them are from Nahda actually and Islamists basically. But so here we lost a bit the sense of we need transitional justice to move forward with the gains of the revolution. But why also we forgot about this? Because when it comes to the work of the Truth and Dignity Authority about reconciliation with people from the old regime also, they messed up. They were not transparent about the money that corrupt people should return, and basically it's Sihem Ben Sidrin again, because I was involved also in these discussion with her to make it transparent, this whole process, but she was on another side, and that's why people lost trust in this authority. And then it is and thankfully we have NGOs like Avocats Sans Frontières, Al Bawsala, ICTG. They are still working on this, and they're following also all in the court, the prosecutions and the whole process. But yeah, again, there's no promotion to these works enough. The narrative, like I said, about does these victims need this money, especially in this economic situation, and this funding, the Dignity Fund, is this necessary in this time of the crisis? And for the anecdote, actually, the 25th of July protests started because previously, like a week before, one of the Nahda party, Abdelkarim Harouni, went out and invited people and the Nahda people to go and protest, to demand their compensation from the Al-Karama Fund, the Dignity Fund. And they said on the 25th of July is the deadline for this fund to be established, and he was threatening also, or we go outside in the streets and make a whole other revolution maybe. And so it was this commands, and what he said was frustrating and was let's say raised many interactions, and people didn't accept it well. And so for the next period until the 5th of July, people were saying, because of these statements and this, so we're going to have to go and protest, and this is our taxpayers' money, etc. Not saying that transitional justice is not good. No, it is necessary to move forward with the revolution, and it started very well, but the process by the end was abolished and was really taken into another direction, and especially because of the people who were managing the Truth and Dignity Authority.
Thanks, Henda. Ayan, do you want to come in on the question of military's involvement? And I think there was also another question about how parties can reconstitute themselves moving forward to support Kais Saied.
Yes, but can I first go back on some comments made okay, thank you. So I respectfully disagree with Bill. First of all, calling back the argument of age, young Tunisians, it's not just about age here. It's not just young Tunisians who were mad about the situation. Also, I don't see what's happening in Algeria happening in the same thing in Tunis, because I don't see in Algeria or in Tunisia the journalist union opened their door to Al Jazeera when they closed the headquarters of Al Jazeera of Tunis. In Tunis, again, when they started military prosecuting lawyers, the Tunis branch of lawyers, Tunis branch of lawyers did what they needed to do in order for them to stop the military justice procedures, which led to the military justice refraining from the rest of the procedures. So I don't think that framing it as a coup, what's happening in Tunisia was a very close oversight from, as I've mentioned, the Bar Association, Journalist Union, of course, the anti-torture body who has been visiting different MPs who are imprisoned and even voicing their concerns. There were even on the independence of justice, there were even concerns that they were talking about taking it up to the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the independence of judges and lawyers. So I think the framing it as a coup where no actual oversight is really not an issue. It's not the same thing as Algeria or Egypt. Another thing, this framing it as the budget of Tunisia feeds Algeria is also a bit, it's not a question of feeding the population. I think it goes beyond that. What people called for was accountability, and they need accountability to be able to go beyond that. Also, what Tunisia needs as many friends as it can have. So the only condition, either from the Saudi Emirati access or any other access, is not to interfere in internal sovereignty and internal matters. And I think before the Emiratis visit in Tunisia, there were the different phone calls and visits from Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Algerian head of state. So I think, and we all know the sensitivity of Algerian towards the Saudi Emirati access. So I think it also frames the thing differently from what has been said. On the military, yes, using the assets of the military in other activities, yes, because the constitution says the military, the armed forces support civilian authority whenever needed and in respect of the law. They have been doing that for since their creation. They have been involved in development projects. They have been involved in different cars of the military have been involved in carrying patients. So the role of the military within the development framework has been there. The role of the military in supporting Ministry of Interior and Civilian Authority has been there from the beginning. I go back to the idea that there is the need for close oversight, for close monitoring from whomever civil organization is watching, or even, as I said, they even said they were gonna take it up to the United Nations. So the military is there to accompany the process so far. And if it thinks about derailing the process, I think that we have organizations that are capable of keeping a close eye on the process. Was there another question?
Oh, thank you, Aya. I want to just kind of go back in reverse order and give each one of the panelists 1 or 2 minutes for any concluding remarks. So Bill, you were going to talk about alternatives. Maybe we can pick up there, and then Fadl, Aya will come back to you, and Hinda as well.
Sure. Let me just start by responding very quickly to Aya's comments. Just to say, I didn't say only young Tunisians have opinions, and I didn't say it was just like Algeria or Egypt. And I don't believe that the Egypt or the Gulf is going to call for accountability, although I agree with the other points she made on that. My main issue, both with what she said and with her article, which is the best thing written right now on constitutionality, so I read it with great interest, but this idea that we have extra constitutional checks and balances and faith in the street is exactly the problem, right? Because extra constitutional checks and balances and the street and civil society as the guarantor of democracy is a proper revolutionary message, but it easily drifts into Bonapartism, whether the first Bonaparte or the third one. So, that's the risk here from a political science perspective. I really do believe that the focus should be on economics as much as anything else. And in terms of alternatives, it's the same list we've been talking about for years that never got implemented. Half of Tunisians work in the informal economic sector. We need to gently tax and regularize these people and bring them in. We need a massive civilian corps for all the unemployed university graduates to work in Tunisia and maybe Niger and Chad as they used to the cooperants. I mean, there are many dozens of mega projects in each province. There are many dozens of economic projects that the Tunisian government, whether democratic or not, could swiftly bring about to signal that socioeconomics are important and socioeconomic suffering is the primary problem in Tunisia. And let me just add quickly too that however much we beat up on parliament, the primary reason for gridlock in Tunisia was not was no single person more than Saied himself. Saied brought in Fakhfakh, Saied brought in Mshishi, then to fire them, Saied stopped the appointing of what they call political ministers as opposed to technocratic ministers. And then he went after, he made collective punishments under the guise of fighting corruption when collective punishments weren't the way to go. So the alternatives here is to simply look at the range of problems Tunisia has, address them one by one, mobilizing Tunisian young people who have the diplomas and the skills to get them done, something that still hasn't been done, some revolutionary movement to address it, and then hold Kais Saied's feet to the fire privately about a 90% as opposed to 51% solution that allows all Tunisians to participate in the reforms, including the political class, including all the non-corrupt members of the political class. I don't see this coming. I'm much more pessimistic, but it can be done. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bill. Fadl?
Thanks. I'd like to end on maybe just sort of one note of how people who are trying to understand what's going on in Tunisia can maybe interpret it. I think oftentimes, particularly when we're looking at the lens of democracy and democratization, that oftentimes there's sort of a model or theoretical sort of understanding of democracy and democratization and how it's supposed to go about, whether it's teleological, whether it's positivist. But in the end, I think it's more helpful to try and consider Tunisia not as a case study for reference to what's happening, in terms of democracy. Where does it fit on the spectrum of democracy? Rather, I think it could be really useful to see what Tunisia is doing as its own contributor to the intellectual production about democracy, what democracy could be, how democracy could look. And I think that those very interesting sort of questions about, how is Tunisia contributing its own knowledge to this very interesting sort of political science question is sort of drowned out when there's a lot of focus in the last few weeks on the presidency himself, on President Kais Saied. There's a lot of things that are happening at the level of society, at the level of civil society, maybe you could call it civil society or otherwise, that I think is quite new and that's quite interesting, not just in terms of structures, but also I think, even when you see this recent vaccination campaign rollout, there was a lot of people who, are the authors of success. Not President Kais Saied alone or the military. Maybe even they're not necessarily in any way related to the success. We'll have to see later in the future to see whether that actually plays out. But certainly all of the volunteers, the medical staff are the people who brought that about. And in a sense, I think whether you say that what Saied done with his decision is good or bad, I think a lot of people recognize it as bold and maybe a moment where we're going to see new things. And perhaps this is why we see some sort of reimagining, some hope among people about how to sort of redefine Tunisian society in totally new ways.
Thanks, Fadl. Aya?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Intisar, and thanks again for this event. I'll just go back on I agree totally on the remark, and it's a shared responsibility, of course. But on who brought al-Fakhfakh and who brought Mshishi, the president asks the winning party to appoint, then ask them, and who grants the confidence? It's up to the parliament. Up to parliament. The final say, it's up to parliament. And the problem is this constitution that the parliament are afraid to be dissolved, so they have to grant confidence. So it's really not, it's this internal mechanism of the constitution that made the problem happen. My last point is about the high expectations of the people and the ceiling of what could actually be done within this limited time frame and within what's actually possible with regard to the socio-economic conditions. That's what I'm really afraid of. People are expecting so much change, and how to deal with those expectations is the real challenge in the coming period. Thank you.
Thanks, Aya. Hinda, you get the last word.
Thank you, Intisar. Thank you to all the panelists, really. So my final take on this is, and maybe a message also to international media and international in general. Like Fadil said, Tunisians should not really, like, it's an advice from a Tunisian not to compare us to Egypt or what's happening, like, I don't know, whatever in the world. Just try to focus on Tunisians themselves. Ask about the right information. Like, we have many trusted people here who can really give like a good the truth about what's happening. The other time I saw a headline that really was not, like, really frustrating. I saw that Tunisia is on how to say, there's like a civil war coming to Tunisia, something like that, and maybe there will be a lot of migrants to Europe. And I mean, this is absolutely not true. We cannot talk about civil war, and we are speaking now live, and people talking and exposing things and speaking freely about themselves and about their opinions. So I think it's so bad that we see such headlines like using civil war, comparing us to Egypt, etc. Yes, we are in a, let's say, the worst situation for our democratic transition. We are fighting. Been 10 years fighting. It's nothing compared to democracies in the world. We're still doing our best. We're still trying to write our own narrative, maybe our own better Tunisia. Mainly our. I've said this, I'm really going to repeat this. The main thing is that Tunisians' demands are the most legitimate ones, and we should always prioritize the health of Tunisians, the benefits, I don't know, employments, etc., and also work on fighting corruption, ending impunity. Because I saw one of the questions: how gonna do this if the economy is not good, etc. Yeah, it's one of the way is fighting tax evasion, and we've been talking about this for years. Ending impunity, fighting tax evasion will be our way out, and social justice also. That's the main message. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hinda. Thank you to all our other panelists, and thank you for joining us and for your patience as we went a little bit over time. So, continue to check the writing of these excellent experts, and we look forward to coming back with another follow-up event in a few